Anthony is a friend of mine from our Techstar days. He has an amazing company called ABF Creative. They produce podcasts. They've had a lot of press recently, which is very exciting. And Leanne is part of Dope Black Women. They have a massive reach with their podcast. I believe their Instagram has like 25,000 something followers. There's also Dope Black Dads, Dope Black Moms, and they have really incredible conversations throughout the diaspora and the world with people of color. Okay, we are officially recording, so I'm going to start now. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining our session today. It's called Bridging the Gap Through Storytelling, Africa and the Diaspora. And today we were going to have a really exciting conversation with 4 people I admire who've had not only experience globally, but have a ton of experience in the States. And some of these guests even have experience on the continent. So what I wanted to do first was introduce everyone on this panel, or have them introduce themselves, what they do for work, and how they engage in the storytelling space. And we'll start with Kevin. Kevin?
I'm Kevin White Brown. I'm the Chief Content Officer and Head of Strategy at Afripods. I'm also a podcast. My podcast is the Create Your Life series. And on the production side, I've produced over 800 podcast episodes. So that's a little about me. I love storytelling and I love Afripods.
And where are you based, Kevin?
I'm based out of Nairobi.
Okay, amazing. And Reni, if you could introduce yourself and what you do and where you are and anything that might be important to the listeners.
Absolutely. First of all, thank you so much for having me, Molly. Thank you to both yourself and Afripods. My name is Reni Somoye. I currently live in Lagos, Nigeria. I've lived here for about 7 years. However, I was born and raised in the States. I started out in public relations and marketing research and did a lot of work for companies like Nike and the NBA and EA Sports. And then obviously I was doing the same work in Lagos as well. And I've recently transitioned into working more so on the media side, and also have a conference called Storytellers, which works to inspire and educate Pan-African storytellers. This year will be our 2nd year, but we're really excited about that. That's me in a nutshell.
I loved the Storytellers Conference, and I can't wait for it to happen again, but I'm glad you plugged that. Anthony, you could introduce yourself and give us a little bit of context as to what you do, your experience in the storytelling space. Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, my name is Anthony Frazier. I'm the CEO and founder of ABF Creative. We're a multicultural podcast production company. We're based in Newark, New Jersey. We produce podcasts mainly for children of color, but we span across also to branded podcasts. So we work with companies like Amazon, Audible, Wondery, Ben & Jerry's, Prudential, and many others. And so a lot of our original content is really just to make sure that we can inform, entertain, and then also help people breathe easy. And so that's what we're all about. And so happy to be here, Molly.
Yeah, and I saw you had some press recently. I've been following all of the social handles. It looks like you have a really exciting 2022 coming up, yeah?
Yeah. I mean, I think we all do. I'm excited for all of us, but yes, we just recently got a billboard for one of our latest podcasts in Times Square. And so, which is a podcast called The Adventures of Cairo, which is about a young Black boy, 7 years old, just learning life lessons, getting into trouble, just trying to bring back that Saturday morning cartoon vibe, but it's a podcast, that's all.
Amazing. I'm so proud of you, Anthony.
Thank you.
And lastly, but not least, Leanne, can you give us a little bit of color as to who you are and what you do and how you engage in the storytelling and podcasting space?
Sure. Thank you for having me, Molly. I really appreciate the space and sharing the space with everyone today. I'm Leanne. I am a political scientist, so I focus on human rights and gender equality, mostly justice reform as well. I do advocacy and communications across the UK and the Caribbean for policy think tanks, as well as private organizations, philanthropists, and so on. And I also am the co-founder of Dope Black Women. So we are a series of safe spaces for Black women across the diaspora and the continent to educate each other, to celebrate each other, to inspire each other, to heal. And so we have spaces mainly in the UK, that's where we started, but we have subsequently expanded to South Africa and the Caribbean. And we have a podcast, weekly podcast, which not only celebrates our stories, but stories from women all across the globe. So yeah, that's us.
Thank you, Leanne. And I think we'll just get right into some of the meat and potatoes of this conversation. So I'd like to start with you, Reni, just because I think storyteller is, the word itself just kind of embodies the DNA of what exists in the continent as well as in the diaspora for Black people and Africans. And something that I was really curious about is, what does storytelling look like for you when you see it, not only from your experience in the States, but moving back to the continent and as media expands, what do you think storytelling looks like?
Storytelling to me, this is going to be a bit of a weird answer, but storytelling to me looks like confidence. It looks like knowing yourself well enough to be able to present yourself to the world. It looks like knowing yourself well enough to present yourself to the world in a really, not necessarily quote unquote dignified manner, although it can be that way, but in a way that does justice to whoever you are and whatever, you know, your path is and your history is and your story is. I also say knowing yourself because us as Black people, as Africans, so much of our history has been systemically wiped out. And obviously to know where you're going, you need to know where you're coming from. And I think that as we connect, I'm actually really excited about technology and things like Clubhouse and Twitter, minus the diaspora wars, because I think that as we connect throughout the Caribbean and America and Africa, we're going to get to know ourselves better, and you know, it will just deepen the Black experience, and obviously that will impact our storytelling. So yeah, that's what storytelling looks like to me.
And Kevin, I saw you nodding your head a little bit there. How do you see storytelling shaping in this present day and the tools that we're using to kind of digitize these stories? What do you think about that?
When I first think of storytelling, I think authenticity, right? And I definitely seconding what Reni said, you know, as far as confidence. But that authenticity factor, the two play together so well, because you then get to confidently tell your story authentically from your perspective. And when we talk about the technology perspective, you know, I think that's why Afripods is so important, because it is a platform that's putting the African content creator first, you know, throughout the diaspora, no matter where you are, where you're at, you know, this is that home and that place, you know, where the largest library of African stories should live and will live. And so giving people that accessibility and allowing them to tell their stories out loud. Because as we have seen, you know, again, seconding what Reni's saying, she's like preaching right now, is, you know, a lot of the history has been systemically wiped out, right? And so even for other platforms, or for some platforms, big media houses I'm talking about, some of those stories have to be sent to other places outside of the country in order for the stories to be approved, to then be given and heard by those who are on the ground here. So I think authenticity and definitely confidence are two very strong factors in making sure that storytelling is something that stands and is, you know, good for the listener, for them to hear themselves.
Absolutely. And Leanne, I mean, what Dope Black Women does in terms of connecting through storytelling is really, really incredible. Do you think that storytelling looks a little bit different, considering that you're using this podcast as a vehicle for it? Or how do you kind of distill what storytelling is?
Yeah, no, I think for me, similar to what Kevin said, authenticity definitely plays a huge role. I think there's a tendency sometimes to play into the idea of respecting politics and only sharing the positive stories. And I think for us, what we try to do is allow women we provide women with a space to be themselves unapologetically, and that includes sharing stories that may not paint us in a great light necessarily. And having lived personally in Jamaica, in the States, and now in the UK, I think it's really important for us to share authentically enough so that we can learn not just from the similarities that we share, but also the differences, and which ordinarily are what seek to divide us as a result of, you know, the history of colonialism and slavery and everything else. I think sharing those differences in a way that is safe and in a way that's authentic helps us to grow and learn and celebrate the diversity across all of the different, all of the diaspora, but then also connect us in a really unique way. So I think for us, we've managed to celebrate our individual stories and have that, and in a way that's relatable to women across the diaspora. But another interesting thing I think that we do is every fourth episode of our podcast, we invite a podcast takeover. So whether that's a podcast from the US or a podcast from the Caribbean or a podcast from the continent, to come in and share their experiences and have us learn from their experiences as well. So I think for us, the authenticity is a huge part, definitely.
I love what you said about the podcast takeovers that you guys have, and that kind of leads into the topic of this discussion. So the conversation is bridging the gap through storytelling, and the reason why it's titled that way is that Black people have such a unique experience globally, but there is this fundamental tie that weaves us all together. And I think, Anthony, to kind of gear this a little bit towards you, something that I find really admirable about what you do is like connecting the community. So a specific question I have for you, Anthony, is what is the importance of community through network podcasting or podcast networking, and what role does that play in storytelling?
Yeah, I mean, for us, it's every story has a nuance. I think one of the things that's a big problem in America is we paint, the Black experience with one brush, and where it's nuanced. There's so many different layers, so many different cultures, so many different stories. And for us, as far as being a podcast network, we want to be able to just bring different colors, to that brush, and really just allow people to hear different experiences, whether it be for children or whether it be for millennials or older individuals or maybe faith-based individuals. So just really I think that's the important part, for us to serve the community is to really just kind of figure out how do we do those different things, and then how do we cross promote them too as a network, to make sure that we're growing the community and creating a community with what we're doing. And as far as like how do we connect with people on the ground, we bring those as live events. One of our first podcasts was a live event done inside a museum where we just brought people on stage to interview them, and people got a chance to kind of see it in person, and then that kind of created the fruit that was like the seed to what we built at ABF Creative as an actual digital community. And so there's different ways to go about it, but I think that the way storytelling, that's pretty much the big part about storytelling, connecting all of those different elements together and really just making sure that we don't look at us through one lens. It's a lot more wider than just our identity and our skin color. It's so many more layers to us.
Absolutely. And I know, Reni, you have strong feelings about community and identity. And I'm curious how you've leveraged storytellers to kind of bridge that gap and make that vehicle that can connect from the continent to the States to Europe to South America to wherever Black people are. So how do you see storytellers bridging the gap, and what do you think that looks like in the future, specifically from the continent to everywhere else?
That is a good question. I mean, first of all, storytellers organically, I don't know how it happened. It was geared towards Pan-Africans. Actually, no, it was geared towards Africans, because I felt like Pan-Africans, specifically people in the US, are a lot more advanced in terms of understanding how powerful storytelling is, and also have access to a lot more infrastructure. As we know, a lot of the biggest, storytelling, actually probably all of the biggest storytelling companies come out of the States. Not all. There's a good amount in Asia as well. But it just naturally, even though it was marketed towards Africans, it naturally ended up going to almost over 40 countries. And I think that just goes to show that it's almost like an if you build it, they will come type thing. I don't even think that we have to be so strategic about, how are we connecting this and how are we doing? I think it just comes naturally because we want to know ourselves. We want to understand ourselves. And I think that once those resources are there and once that infrastructure is there, people just kind of naturally flock to it. So
that's really insightful. And I agree with you. Kevin, so tying this back to Afripods, I'm curious, what does Afripods do in terms of their product, as well as what is their responsibility in bridging the gap, or how do you see that?
Well, in terms of our product, I think when we talk about responsibility, I think responsibility is accessibility, right? I think that's one of the biggest things, which is why Afripods is free for the user, and we don't have any limits on the amount of content like per gig right at the moment that you can upload to the platform. I think, so it doesn't matter if you're in your shags, if you're on the coast, if you're in the city, you have opportunity, you have access to the platform to get your story out and tell it authentically again, from, on the ground as you see fit. I think that in terms of responsibility, I feel like that's what Afripods is doing. I'm sorry, I think I'm forgetting your question.
How are they bridging the gap? So what does that look like from bridging the gap in storytelling?
Okay. Well, I mean, right now, I think we're doing a lot of work with the education from the educational standpoint. And I think we're doing a lot of work with community building as well, as we've had like our different podcaster roundups in South Africa, now Uganda coming up and things like that. So those are the things that I would say are probably the biggest efforts that we're putting forth right now in order to do so. Okay,
great. And I guess to kind of pivot a little bit towards podcasting specifically, I'm curious, Anthony, I'm going to go to you for this one, but my general question is it a culturally important moment what podcasting is doing specifically for African culture and Black culture globally? And if so, how?
Oh, most definitely. It's an easy way. Look, we can't control everybody's microphone, so you're going to get a lot of voices leaking through that probably shouldn't have a platform. But the purpose and what it does overall the positive is going to outweigh the negative, in my opinion. It's expanding storytelling in ways that we haven't been able to really experience before. People being able to create, to make a film, it costs a lot of money, sometimes a lot of energy to put something together and put it on, YouTube. A lot of people, especially, from the stories I've heard, don't necessarily have access to, the materials or even the Wi-Fi capabilities to do a lot of these things that YouTubers are doing. And so podcasts present that a great opportunity to just use audio. Anchor, apps like Anchor allow you to podcast directly from an app. There are people who have very popular shows directly from Anchor. You don't necessarily need to have a studio with a mic arm and making it look like a fake radio station. You don't have to get all of that stuff going. You can really just start where you are. And so I think it's important. And it allows us to just expand our storytelling. That's all. I think that's what it does. It just adds more to what we've already been doing. So I'm excited about where the future is going with it.
And Leanne, just to kind of follow up with that same question, because you do have a podcast and you have reach in Europe and the Caribbean and on the continent, I'm curious specifically for African culture and Black culture globally, knowing that your podcast is called Dope Black Women, or knowing that the podcast is called Dope Black Women, do you feel like this is an important cultural moment that's happening with audio, with Black people being able to basically own their own voice? Or do you have any strong opinions on that?
Yeah, I definitely do. I mean, I think storytelling is such an embedded part of our culture, regardless of where you are across the globe, across Black culture. Storytelling is something that is quite organic and historically very important to our culture. And so I think the fact that we're able to showcase that on a global scale through podcasting is really important. It does give us the power, as Anthony says, to tell our own stories, which is extremely important, because I think, as other people have said, a lot of our stories have been shrouded through other people's lenses. And so having a direct feed from our personal stories to the globe is really important in terms of educating people who sit outside of Black culture, who sit outside of the diaspora, but also people who sit within it. So again, connecting people across the Caribbean, the US, and having them understand the nuances of how culture within these different spaces has manifested, how racism is manifested across those different spaces, and how we can come together to understand those differences, but also celebrate them, but also unite to kind of combat against whatever forces are going against us. So I think it's really important in terms of uniting everyone, but I think it's also just really important in terms of expanding and cementing something that is so embedded within our culture historically.
I love that. And, Reni, to pass this to you, something that I really enjoyed with storytellers was just how Pan-African the speakers were, like how much reach you were able to get from the people who were engaging with the conference. And so I'm curious, throwing the same question your way, is it a culturally important moment what podcasting and storytelling is doing specifically for African and Black culture right now? Do you have any opinions on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, honestly, I think every medium that we engage in is important. And I think it's important for us to show up in as many ways, just take up space in as many ways and places as possible. What I do love about podcasting, as Anthony said, is that the barriers to entry are really, really low. And then when you look at, for example, here in Africa, when people might have bad internet, it's a lot easier of a medium to consume than something that takes up heavier data. And because, as Anthony said, again, the barriers to entry are so low, there's so much opportunity for so many different people, so many different types of people, and people who might have stories to tell but might not have the funds to do other mediums to get involved. So that just means that the breadth of stories is wider. And when the breadth of stories is wider, obviously, that leads to more connection, you know what I mean? And then also I think the fact that podcasting is just naturally a way of archiving our stories. So I'm actually really excited about the fact that 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 50 years from now, a lot of the discussions and arguments and disagreements that we have now, hopefully our children, our grandchildren are not going to have to deal with them, just because there will be so much historical fact and cultural fact that has been embedded in podcasts. So absolutely, I think that it's a critical cultural moment for us.
Amazing. And Kevin, I really want to just kind of close out with that, because a lot of what Reni was saying, I know that you and I have had conversations about this plenty of times. So I can kind of either let you respond to Reni, but also I have a question around how do you see the podcasting industry shaping the future of audio globally? And how do you see Africa playing a part?
Well, wow, that's a huge question. I think podcasting, number one, because of the behavior that's taking place on the continent, that's really ingrained with radio, I think that there has to be a merge between the two, right? Even if it's just syndicating radio, just accessibility in order to change the behavior so that podcasting becomes a big thing here. I second what Reni was saying about the archiving of history, and especially language. As you know, languages, especially here on the continent, a lot of native tongue, mother tongue is, not necessarily being used as much as the colonial tongues. And I think that that's very important for us to archive these things so that you can look back and say, hey, these were the conversations and the things that were taking place. I think one of the bigger things that sticks out to me, I am Pan-Africanist, is that a lot of times with all of these different stories that are being told authentically, when you get to listen to, your friends who are throughout the diaspora, you actually get to see the commonality that we have, right? In habits, in culture, and things like that. Like, it might look a bit different, but there's these huge commonality that we have, even though colonialism has made us separate ourselves and things like that. Different conversation, but an important one to note. Right. And an important one to have as, audio does expand and does become and is this dominant thing. And so as it's pertaining to the continent specifically, I'm very, very excited. And like you said, we have these conversations all the time. We're very excited about what's to come. Now it's just a matter of honestly enabling and helping people to be the masters of their own story, which I think is really, really important. And so us getting behind the communities and those who are already participating and then building more, I think is just the way to go. So, podcasting, I think that Africa, and this is your words, Molly, Africa will be the number one, I can't even say it as good as you, but Africa will be the number one place for podcasting and audio storytelling, just because it's sheer, it's just a native thing, to Africans. So I applied for
I
NSA.
believe that Africa will be the number one global podcasting market in the world just because storytelling is so fundamental to Black people globally, and people are familiar with getting audio and information from an auditory perspective. That is my fundamental belief, and I'm so excited to see everyone. It's not just about the continent, it's about Black people globally. And I think that's something that's really exciting. Before we kind of pivot a little bit more is, Kevin, you had spoken a little bit about commonality of the experience that Black people share globally, even though it might look a little bit different or in language. And Leanne, I'm curious, because you guys have this podcast reach and also podcast base in multiple different continents. Have you seen any similarities in terms of the content that you're generating or the way that people react or feel to things? Or do you feel like you're getting very unique conversations from very different places? Like, what is that thread that, I guess, connects us, if I can ask that?
I mean, I think it's both. I think we get extremely unique experiences being discussed, but then I think there are also stories that we share that are extremely relatable. So for instance, we just did a podcast about endometriosis, and we've done another one earlier around polycystic ovarian syndrome, which are both issues that affect Black women in a very serious way. And not only do they affect Black women in a serious way, but also Black women are more likely to be neglected by the medical health system. So I think there was a lot of relatability within those topics. But then we have completely unique situations that are discussed. For instance, when we're discussing the LGBTQ plus community in the Caribbean, it looks very different than it does in the UK. And so people are able to learn from the historical differences and so on. So I think it is very, I think there's a balance of similarities which people can join in on, but then there's also differences that allow people to learn from each other as well.
That's a great answer. And I think that's very important, right? To understand that we are all similar, like human beings. We all have fundamental similarities, but based on where you are and who you interact with in your environment, there are differences there. And Anthony, so something that is very interesting to me, and I think you should kind of explain to the group, is last time we spoke, and I know you spend a lot of time working on like digitizing children's stories. I believe we spoke about, it either was Zimbabwe or Tanzania. There's a children's story there that's going on. Is there any news with that?
Oh yeah, so I was literally just thinking about that. So one of our most popular podcasts is actually a podcast called Achille and Me, and it's in partnership. It's actually created by and in partnership with a nonprofit named Ubongo. So Ubongo has Achille and Me YouTube, which gets about 10 million views a month on YouTube from children all over the world, not just in the continent. And so I saw this content and I reached out to them, and they said that they, like Kevin just mentioned, they're only accessible on radio. And so I was able to take their content, actually create a podcast channel for them. And it's still a really popular podcast channel. Another thing that we've done is we actually have a podcast called African Folktales with Miss JoJo, which is our way of kind of modernizing many African folktales that come from the continent. That podcast is enjoyed by mostly children in the United States. So that's our largest listener base, is the United States for that podcast. And so that just shows you that, that the podcast and content coming from the continent has so much crossover appeal. People just don't know it and they haven't heard it yet. And so if that shows you just how much potential there is, even just right there within the children's space, I can only imagine how much potential is untapped already. So
that's huge and incredibly important. I mean, we all know how untapped African and Black stories are globally in terms of the narrative behind it doesn't usually come from Black people, right? You can look at even history. Like history tend to be told through a white lens. So I think that the fact that you are seeing those type of numbers and engagement from the states, people being interested in this content is incredibly exciting and promising for creators on the continent, which leads me to a expression that Reni said once in Storytellers, and I have repeated it in every meeting I've ever been to. Reni, I don't think you know this, but you said, I just want to see African creators take up as much space as possible and get paid for their content. And that is something that resonated with me so deeply that I speak it every time I say it to someone, because it's succinct, it's concise, and it's what we need. So Reni, if you could kind of expand on that a little bit and your positioning on that, because I think that that's a very important crutch of what we're doing.
Sure. I mean, I think for me, at least from what I've seen here in Lagos and the past, 7 years that I lived on the continent, I think there's such opportunity in building infrastructure. I think that as Molly, as you've said, and as a lot of people have reiterated here today, we're natural storytellers, right? But how do you continuously create content? It takes money. And the only way to kind of aggregate that money, the only way to gather that money and redistribute it is infrastructure, right? So until we build that infrastructure, we'll always kind of be building, we're going to kind of be building sandcastles. So I think that it's really, 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 really important for companies like Afripods and, similar companies that are building infrastructure and helping people to be able to consistently tell stories in whatever those mediums may be. I think that that's extremely key. And I think that that's the base, like that's where we have to start. Everything else, I honestly believe is just natural to us. We are natural orators, we're natural storytellers. I think that we're incredible filmmakers. We just need infrastructure and we need training institutes and that kind of stuff. And I think that we'll be good to go. And that taking up space, it gets discouraging when you feel like you're pursuing a passion or, you want to be an actor, a filmmaker, a director, a producer, whatever the case may be. If there's no path before you and every single person has to start from zero and forge a path, it gets extremely discouraging. And it also discourages other people from doing it, or they might not even know it's possible because they're not seeing that many people do it and succeed at it. So I think infrastructure is the absolute base. And I think that once that's taken care of, we're going to be absolutely unstoppable.
I love this. I really cannot tell you how many times I've said that expression, and just hearing that and understanding the type of impact and responsibility we have as creators, as people who are building infrastructure, as people who are taking pieces of this storytelling pie, I think that's really important. And Kevin, being that Afripods is building the infrastructure or building the technical solution to podcasting on the continent, I'm curious if you have any feedback or additions to that. I know that you spent a ton of time working on statistics and are currently in conversations about monetization, but if there's anything you'd like to add or share, I'd like to give you the floor.
No, absolutely. I mean, that's the thing, is the infrastructure, right? So going from being on radio in New York and podcasting at the same time, and then coming to the continent where I was just basically traveling the continent, doing research on podcasting, market here, I was inspired to get on the technical side of things, outside of production, outside of being the talent, so that the platform and the structure would be built and it could be built catered to us. I think that it's extremely important. And one of the things that, we have been doing at Afripods is making sure that, like, this is Africa first, like by far, even when it comes to our statistical dashboard, working, I'm like literally living in the tech. And from and I'm not a technical, I don't have a technical background. But because I've spent so much time, uploading to different platforms, using different platforms as a podcaster, training podcasters, things of that nature, then I understand what it is that we need, and also having conversations with creators from the continent to understand and make a platform that is literally unique to the needs of the African creator and also of for those of us throughout the continent. And so when we talk about like Afripods and we talk about our back end and things like that, like the first thing that you'll see when you look at the geographic area is a huge continent of Africa, right? Because that's the first thing. And then we go into the Asia and the things in the Oceania and Americas and things like that, because it's all about the African and making sure that we have a solution that is literally catered here. So, you know, everything that we're talking about here on this panel was literally what inspired me. I still get to create, but to go onto the technical and infrastructure building aspect of things to make sure that we had a platform that was essentially for us, by us, and that puts our needs at the forefront of storytelling and of what it is that we need to be supported in order for us to then go on and to monetize, right? Because, you know, Molly, I now know that you got the statement from Reni, and Reni, I've been saying it as well, and I've been like, you know, I've kind of tweaked the last word only, right? We want to see African creators take up as much space as possible, and my thing is for them to get paid for their genius. So I just tweaked that last word because I think that if you have the talent and the confidence and the authenticity, you know, using all the words that we've been talking about here, to get out here and tell your story and to get people to listen to it. To me, I call that genius, right? And being able to create is a form of genius, no matter how big or small creativity, you know, the heights that it reaches. To me, it's still genius because you're creating something out of thin air from the mind and things like that. So it is all about, you know, having the infrastructure and having something that is African creative focused. In my opinion, that is what Afripods is. That is what I wake up every single day, you know, thinking about, working about, and even now, like I'm in Addis Ababa, like visiting, but I'm having conversations about and talking to people and asking them about what their needs are and things like this. And I was like, you know, I'm not going to miss this panel to have the opportunity to speak to you geniuses, but to also, you know, be able to have the conversation to further what it is that our mission is, and that's putting the African creator first, making sure that they have the infrastructure to support their genius.
Thank you, Kevin. And Reni, I just want you to know that you have really had impact on us over here. So you may not have known it, but and I'm sure everyone on this panel, there have been things that you have said or done that have truly impacted other people, and you have no idea how far that reaches. And I kind of want to gear that statement both to Anthony and Leanne, specifically Leanne. I mean, being that you guys are based on 3 continents, the impact is huge. And your social media, I believe you have over 25,000 followers or something like that. My question specifically is, how do you think podcasting will grow, specifically with Dope Black Women? And how do you see podcasting shaping the future of audio globally, if there's any trends there?
Well, I think in terms of for us personally, or as an organization, we really do want to give as much visibility to other women's and other Black people's story as much as possible. We also believe in allyship, so we do create a lot of space for men and women to have conversations together, because I do believe that there's a huge divide between Black men and Black women that needs to be restored as well. So I think we just want to keep growing and keep providing spaces for women to network with each other. You know, in addition to the social media platform that we have, one of the things that we've been able to see develop quite organically through the podcast and through our WhatsApp groups are women who are coming together, they're forming businesses, they're building relationships, they're supporting each other through their entrepreneurial journeys, they're providing each other with networks and resources. And so actually it has been, I think podcasting in general does have the capacity to create really strong bonds and provide kind of collaborative working, which I think is extremely important. I think prior to podcasting, one of the things that we saw were women developing their own spaces within their specific continents or countries. And podcasting, I think, has provided the possibility for women to work across the different continents and to connect across the different continents and to form bonds and bridges, and really to create this, you know, to bridge the gap, as you've said, across the continent, for women to grow together, particularly in a lucrative manner, like really focusing on building the financial wealth and the financial legacy. The legacy of wealth across Black women has been beautiful to see, actually. So I think podcasting has had has played an instrumental role in that.
Mhm.
Definitely.
Amazing. And you said something about bonds and bridges. And Anthony, it brought me back to the children's stories that you're telling, or the podcasts that are children's stories that are being well received in the States. And I think that is a clear example of bridging the gap, and also something that I think creators are looking for here from my conversations has been exposure. And I can't understate how important what you're doing, bringing these stories to a different space and region, how important that is and how valuable that work is. So my question to you is, one, do you have more plans of doing so moving forward? If there's anything in the works you can tell us. And two, how do you see specifically podcasts that have African stories or African fables or morals embedded to them being part of your core business?
Yeah, I think, one thing I want to highlight is that I don't market to the US. I just put podcasts out. So the fact that it resonates here is a completely organic reaction, to us putting the content out. And I only say that because I believe Africa is a sleeping giant, when it comes to the podcast industry, when it comes to podcasting in general. I believe when the momentum happens, as it's starting to happen with you guys, I feel like Afripods is, has that snowball, and you just kicked it down the hill. Now that snowball will just continue to get larger and larger and larger. And so, for me, yes, the short answer is yes. I definitely plan to figure out that, but I want to figure out how do I be a better ally too. You know what I mean? And bring in, African creators into the fold and working with them, specifically, just like how we did with Ubongo, and that was a really good opportunity. We learned a lot working with Ubongo. And so we want to figure out other creators that we could connect with and work with and do partnerships with for sure, and help them to get exposure in the US, but also just figure out how do we help and be part of the movement in Africa too. How do we help to expand and bring more light to the creators that are on the continent? And so being a better ally, being a better cheerleader, being a better supporter is definitely a big part of ABF Creative's goals in 2022 for sure.
I'm so excited. I cannot wait. So we're about to be wrapping up this panel, and I wanted to ask a question to everyone. I'll go one by one, but how can anyone reach you if they wanted to contact you or had any questions? So if you could share either an email or a social media handle on this so that they can get in touch with you. And if you had any last words, whether it was the trends that you think are going to happen in audio or your belief on podcasting or anything at all, this is your moment. So let's go with Reni first, and we'll follow with Leanne, Anthony, and then Kevin. Reni?
Sure. Again, I just wanted to say thank you for having me on here today. It's been incredible. And hearing about everybody's work, I'm constantly just like in awe of us and all we do. Yeah, so the best way to reach me is probably Twitter. If you go on there, and I'm cutting up, please don't mind me. I'm not a serious person on Twitter, but it's my name, Reni Somoye, ReniSomoye. You can also DM me on Instagram. And I'm sorry, what was the other thing?
If you had any final words or anything that you wanted to say that maybe I didn't give you time to say, this is your time if you want.
I mean, I would say once again that I just think we really need infrastructure. Like, for example, I'm trying to start my podcast, and it's been really hard to find a proper podcasting company out here. We are as human as everybody else is, and it's a lot to ask one person, for example, to be their own producer, editor, marketer. So yeah, I think that my last words is just infrastructure, and that also we should also look around ourselves. I know I said this during Storytellers as well. Look around ourselves and network across and see who we can work with and collaborate with in order to bring our dreams to life in lieu of, completely advanced infrastructure that we don't have yet. So yeah, that's it. Aside that, it's been a pleasure, and congrats to everyone on the amazing work that you're doing. I was really excited to hear about it today.
Thank you for participating, Reni. Thank you. Leanne, do you have anything that you'd like to say, as well as any way people can contact you or Dope Black Women? You're on mute, Leanne. Sorry.
Thank you.
There you go.
You can contact us at info@dopeblackwomen.org, but also you can reach out to us across our social medias. So on Twitter and Facebook, we're Dope Black Women. On Instagram, we're Dope Black Women 1. And please feel free to just slide into our DMs and reach out to us. We're always looking to connect with different organizations, Black-led organizations, whether podcasting or otherwise, and providing visibility to those organizations. So please reach out to us. And I think, just on a personal note, I think that podcasting for my co-founder and I, Roshan, has been actually such a therapeutic process in terms of being able to have a platform to share our stories and to be able to connect with other women who are also, who relate to our stories as well. So I think if there's anything I would say is, there's great strength to be found in vulnerability, and that can be achieved through sharing your stories. So as I think Anthony would have said, whether or not you have access to great Wi-Fi, whether you have a producer, whether you have the proper mic and the proper equipment, just start sharing your stories in any capacity that you can, because I think you will be surprised by the level of impact you'll be able to have just by sharing authentically with other people. So yeah.
Thank you, Leanne. Thank you. And Anthony, if there's a way that people can contact you or any final words, the floor is yours.
Yeah. My handle on all social media is my first and last name, Anthony Frazier, which is on the screen, Frasier. And as far as ABF Creative, same thing. Our handles on Instagram and Twitter is all ABF, the letter A, the letter B, the letter F, Creative. And feel free to shoot me a DM. Feel free to shoot, the company a DM. We're always looking. We're always, listening. Contact me for anything. As far as, my outlook on podcasting and the podcast industry in general, I'm very optimistic about where everything is going. I'm super excited. I mean, we gotta be. This is the industry we in. So I'm super excited about it. And, just start now, whatever it is and that you're trying to do. You just don't know how fast you can probably, manifest, what you're trying to do through podcasting if you just get started today. And so that's my tips for anyone who might be listening and watching and thinking about being a podcaster. So
that's a great message, Anthony. Thank you for that. And Kevin, how can people contact you, as well as if you have any last words that you'd like to share?
Absolutely. Number one, you can contact me at Kevin Y. Brown on all platforms, KEVIN, the letter Y, Brown. Also, you can contact me through our social media. Afripods, our community manager, is very great at making sure that we get all messages that are geared towards us individually. So that's Afripods on every social media platform. And I think my message in regards to the industry, in regards to other creators, is to collaborate, ideate, create a mission. Your genius, and also just be consistent. The journey is long, but the rewards and impact are immeasurable. So do the work, and it will reward you.
Thank you for that, Kevin. And to wrap everything up, I think when I think about bridging the gap, the word that comes to mind is community. And all four of you guys are champions in that space throughout the diaspora and on the continent. So the impact of the four of you being on this call and lending your thoughts and your minds to this, I am so grateful. I thank all of you immensely, and I feel incredibly inspired by this. So on that, thank you for helping bridge the gap between the diaspora and Africa, and happy Africa Podcast Day to everyone. Thank you. Bye.